Okay, good morning, everybody. Welcome to session 4 of our trip. Today's a big day. Yes. Why is it a big day?
It's Friday.
That's one good reason. There's another good reason.
UFU1?
That's another good reason. It's that third reason. We have 7 sessions, and this is the 4th one. It's hump day. So, today is the 2nd day on Scrum. We will go into more of the execution aspects of Scrum today, and then wrap up the Scrum discussion, and then the following 2 sessions will be on the Kanban method, and then the wrap-up session. So, and the materials and the webinar from last week are posted. I apologize, I did not get them posted until today, but they are up there on SharePoint as of now. Okay, it's review time. Scrum is best suited to A, B, C, D, or E. Sorry?
C is right.
C is correct. But there's actually 2 right answers, because it's also, to some extent, D, because as we go along, we get clarification on the projects, right, on the requirements. But the primary answer is indeed C. Typical sprints run for how long?
2 to 6 weeks.
Correct. 2 to 6 weeks, the most common being actually apparently 2 weeks. That was the last information I had anyway. We talked about story cards. Basically define the requirements. When the story card is basically done, there's some elements that should be on it. Which of those elements, and there's more than one, should be on the story card when we go into the cycle? Pardon? Acceptance criteria is one. Yes. Story points.
Story title.
Story title.
What about a priority?
Priority. They're missing one.
Status? No. So they're missing one more?
Comments. There has to be a place for comments. It goes on the back along with the acceptance criteria. And those all should be on the story card when we bring it into Sprint, or even in Kanban when we bring it into the process. Who prioritizes the backlog? Who? What's the your turn? No, the correct answer is a monkey on crack. How much do you have to pay to rent the monkey? Yes, the senior team with the project manager generally do that. Now we're in a sprint planning session, right? That is primarily the implementation team and the product owner. And they've gone through all this planning. What's the final step in that planning?
multiple choice.
I write the multiple choice there. But we've gone through, we've decided what we think we should do, what stories fit into this particular sprint. We kind of got them tentatively assigned to who's going to execute from a development standpoint. But we're at the very end. We go around the group and everybody needs to what? Sign in blood. Well, commit to completing the sprint. Everybody needs to commit that they agree that that's what we're going to strive to do and do everything we can do.
And then you said as part of the Scrum methodology, you had dedicated,
I'm sorry,
you had dedicated resources. So that's,
yes.
So that's part of that, right?
Right.
Commit that.
It's the same team is by definition Scrum there. We'll talk about possible exceptions. And so they all have to commit to getting it done. I'm going to reach back a little bit. There's some key terms that we used early on. So, what's the work backlog? What's in that?
Stuff that should have gotten done that didn't get done.
Pardon?
That's with the task within your story.
Story that are they assigned to a sprint?
Yes.
No.
That would be coming up.
That would be coming up. So, right, the backlog is work that's there, that's waiting to be assigned to a sprint, but is not assigned to a sprint, and needs to be prioritized and ordered and all that other stuff. A theme.
Container for your stories.
Basically, that's right. It's a high-level requirement, which then gets broken down into some other things. So, what's an epic? Oh boy, guys, I've made this easy.
It's just the things where you pick some requirements that are really important, and you also try to fit in some that are sort of icing on the cake at the same time without.
That's true too, but that's not.
So this is a collection of stories, right? With
Theme, which breaks down generally to epics, which breaks down generally to user stories. Okay, so it's basically the hierarchy of the requirements, if you will. The user story being the one that goes on the story card. Epics sometimes make it as far as into the work queue for the phase, but before they actually can work on it as part of the sprint planning session, they would generally break it into level stories so that they have a consistent level going into implementation. And then, what's the work queue? I'm going to have to start assigning homework. And Raju's not here. I'm so disappointed.
and he claimed his email when I told him I suspected he was deliberately late. He said he actually looked at the stuff last night and he's phone. He thought he would knock this out.
I hear he's claiming he has a flat tire.
It's hard to believe he would have done worse than us, though. So I'm confused between, I think, that and the backlog.
Yeah, those are the two that can be confused. The work queue is the assigned work for that sprint.
So it's already in process.
It's right. It's what you're going to start a sprint. You say, this is the stuff we're going to do. Okay. And when we talked about the backlog, we said it needed to be deep. And of course, deep was a acronym for what? What does the D stand for?
Detail.
Yes.
I guess. I couldn't have decided to say.
Close your laptop. Close your bed.
Oh, not cheating.
Yes, detailed. It should be detailed to, and if it's a higher priority, it should be more detailed, but detailed so that it's fairly clear. There's 2 E's, so I don't care which order. Estimated, yes. It should be estimated. At least at a course level, if it's in the backlog, it needs to be an effective story point or whatever estimation method you're using by the time it goes into the work queue to be worked on. What's the other E? This one's a little harder.
Judging.
Emergent. So it's the requirements that change, right? Requirements change. So there should be new requirements, if there are any, or refined requirements in the backlog. And P, prioritized. Now, in the case of Scrum, normally when you say prioritized, right, we think of number 1 to 100, 1 is most important, blah, blah, blah. But in the case of Scrum, it has a slightly different meaning. And I think I called it ordered. And what we mean there is that they're appropriately grouped for what would be logically accomplished in a sprint. So you may have a very high important requirement that's going to come in a later sprint. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about they're prioritized in the sense of groups that make logical sense for a sprint. Question? Any questions? So from last week, we visited some key points, right? We talked a little bit about these, right? Scrum is best suited to products for large projects, largely because you've got a fixed team. That team is supposed to stay completely focused on the work in their work queues, and so that's generally the best use. If it's a big project or a product, it needs to be backed up by a vision, right, for what the project or product is supposed to accomplish, by a roadmap that says how we're going to get from where we are to accomplish the vision, and then an execution plan, if you will, a release plan that says this is what we're going to have in each release along the way. Then from there on down, that's where we're doing our agile work. Key team values. Commitment, that's what we talked about at the end. Committed to delivering what we've said is agreed to as going in that sprint. The courage to communicate, to say when you need help, and to actually reach out and help others when you can. Focus, again, you're supposed to be focused on sprint only. Openness, again, kind of comes back in the way to courage. The team has to be open with each other, comfortable with each other. And respect, which is kind of an underlying essential element for all the others, which is respect for each other as professionals. And if we have problems, the problem's out on the table to be looked at. The person isn't the problem is the problem. We talked about the backlogs, we prioritize, and the essential aspects of the story. Okay, let's talk about sprint planning. So we talked about, up here would be the backlog. And so now we're in this set of tasks right here where we're planning for the sprint. And basically what comes out of that planning is what's in the queue to go into the cycle over here, right? So there's a couple of key terms. One is velocity. And velocity is the number of story points that a given team can accomplish in one sprint. Okay? So, a couple things about that, right? It presumes a team that is consistent, right? It's got the same membership, consistency in the membership. And you expect, as the team matures, you expect the velocity to increase, right? You expect to see an increase in the velocity. That's the incremental improvement and the efficiency going up, right? So, if we were to use Scrum, or Canvas for that matter, just the same approach will apply. Assume low velocity. If you assume a higher velocity, everybody just gets frustrated, right? So give yourselves the opportunity to be successful with the lower velocity to start on in terms of the assumptions that are used for what goes into the works.
And you said a cycle typically 2 weeks is what?
For a sprint.
For a sprint?
For a Scrum sprint, typically 2 weeks. It can be 4 weeks, it can be 6 weeks. It's not 2 months or 3 months, it's some number of weeks. So again, it's measured against a fixed team size and membership. Hours per day available per team member, right? And the cycle length, right? Obviously, you're not going to have the same velocity if for some reason you were running 4-week sprints and now you're running 2-week sprints. It's going to change. But so long as these things and team size and membership have to be the same, you expect to have a velocity that gradually increases as you gain experience. Now, velocity leads to a term called capacity. And capacity is how many story points can you complete in a sprint. And velocity basically equals, or capacity basically equals velocity if the team is the same, right? The number of work hours available in the cycle is consistent with the work hours that were available in the prior cycles, right? So, you think about this sprint, everybody was here. The next sprint, Michelle had 2 days of vacation. That changes the capacity for that sprint. It may still be 2 weeks. Michelle still a member of the team, but she's going to be out a couple days. So those sorts of things are going to adjust your capacity. Now, obviously, you can't plan for people who are going to be sick, right, unless you know they're going to be out for a given reason. But when you're looking at your capacity, you need to look forward who may not be available for parts of this sprint. And if there's somebody not available for the entire sprint, then you may need to substitute someone. And when you do that, you need to make a judgment call as to how experienced is that person in the process, and how productive are they in general compared to other staff.
But why wouldn't that just be your velocity? Why wouldn't that be taken into account when you...
We change your velocity, but your velocity is measured
by the number of...
by sprint.
Right, so we have a sprint, and we said the velocity is 10. There's 10
Right.
things we're going to get done.
That's how many?
But
How many did get done?
velocity is how many you...
Did get done. Capacity is an estimate of what should be able to get done in the sprint coming up. So basically, capacity is your velocity adjusted for all the variances. So, what's the actual team this time? How many hours? If it's always a 2-week cycle, is there a holiday? All that stuff. So, to plan the sprint, the team needs to know a few things. Obviously, they need to know how many stories there are. It's a story size. That was the wrong word. How many stories do we think we're going to want to... let me back up again. Story size, meaning each of these stories is this number of story points, right? How long is this sprint going to be in hours, effectively accounting for holidays and such? The capacity, what are we anticipating the capacity will be given the team we have? So, in doing the sprint planning, the first thing the team does is look at the period that's going to be the sprint. Identify what they think the capacity is going to be based on the story points and the actual hours that are going to be available in that sprint. Then they pick a story or an epic. It's an epic. It's time to break it up into stories. Then they identify specific tasks and take tentative ownership. Primarily now we're talking about developers, right? So who's going to own it from a development standpoint? Usually you will have, on a smallest team, and these generally are fairly small teams, one change management person who's going to be working on the change management deliverables, perhaps as Anita pointed out last week, some of the work that they may be doing in this sprint is finishing up work from the prior sprint, because change management work always is on the tail end.
So Bob, how does, maybe I missed this, but so we had stories, we estimated those, but we gave them points.
Story points.
So it's not like for story A, we said it's 10 development hours and 5 functional hours. We said it's 40 points, whatever the...
Correct.
Right, so now you're in the planning phase, and you're picking these stories. So how do you translate those? You're looking at points. Do you also have real estimates at this point?
No. Your estimate is the story points. Now, some teams have evolved. I think Anita alluded to it, that some people break it down and think about, well, how many functional story points do I have versus technical? The defined methodology says you look at the team as a whole,
right,
and the story points that can get to the team, and you balance the membership of the team,
right,
based on skills to accomplish those points.
I'm just trying to figure out how I would translate story points into real capacity.
Well, that's the whole point is that the capacity changes as we go through the project, right? So we start out slower and then we get a faster and more efficient as we progress through.
And you track it. That's one of the metrics over time. You track your
Over
velocity.
time, we've realized that this team I have can't do this many story points.
Correct.
As long as the work stays around the same blend of technical versus functional work, it should work.
All those things,
Okay.
right.
Right.
So basically, you keep going through the stories, and again, remember they have been prioritized / ordered, so you're probably taking them in the logical order. and you add them in until you think you've about filled the capacity for the sprint. And then you all look at each other and swallow. So, okay, yep, we'll do it. All right? So now we're ready to run the sprint. And if it's a 2-week sprint, they typically lay out a team calendar, right? Because there's a number of things that happen in the sprint, right? So if it's 2 weeks, then the first day there'll be cyclical planning will happen on the first day, so that's basically the sprint planning, and then the team gets to work, right? Starting from then on, basically, until the last day of the cycle, there's the daily stand-up meeting. We talked a little bit about that. We'll talk a little bit about it again. Meeting basically first thing in the morning for about 15 minutes to checkpoint where we are, what challenges we have, what are we going to do next, those sorts of things. And that just continues. But sometime in this cycle, we have to go back and look at the backlog, right? Talked about that we need to groom the backlog. So in this particular model, the Monday of the second week, a couple hours are spent with the project owner, product owner, grooming the backlog so that we have the groom backlog ready for doing cycle planning for the next sprint. And then you continue working, and basically by the end of day 11 in this case, or the morning of day 12, you're done. And either you've completed all your stories points, or you haven't. And sometimes you'll miss. But you are where you are, time's up, draw the line, and you'll deal with any misses as you plan the next sprint. Okay? But that's when you do the sprint demo. Remember we talked about sprint demo last week? Who's that to? Who are we demoing the product of the sprint to?
The customer.
The customer, right? And so you're showing them what you've got, what you've accomplished, and it may well be in context of what you've accomplished in the prior sprints, okay? Remember, we had all this, now we've got this too, right? So they see it in context. One of the things is, a demo is a demo. This is not something you go create extra materials for. You're not going to go build charts that describe what's happening. You're going to give them a demo. That's it, right?
So if you don't have something kind of functioning that you can, and I'm thinking true demo here, if you don't have something functioning in this sprint, that you can actually demo that a discussion of where you are.
That would be what you would have to do, but that would be very bad. Because each story is supposed to deliver a functioning piece of code. Each story. And you have X story points which should represent multiple stories. And if none of them are done, we're going to have a really interesting discussion about what happened.
Well, I think she's saying they're done, but it's not something you can show. It's not a complete product. I think you're saying that the goal has to be something you can show.
Something you can show.
That's the whole point of having a sprint.
Correct.
It's just one sprint.
So there's not, sorry, maybe I'm telling myself here. So pre-sprint, you've done enough requirements, functional design, to get into actually showing software. Because I guess I was assuming this part of the sprint, or is the sprint really the functional team talking to the technical team and delivering it at the same time?
it's this, remember when we went through and we basically did the high-level design, and out of the high-level design, let's say notionally, we ended up with themes, major themes that are pretty well boxed. Then there was the breakdown at the next level to epics and stories, which represent requirements from a customer's viewpoint that should represent something that could be shown. Right. Now, when you actually get into the sprint, but you haven't done the detailed technical design.
Right.
So early in the sprint, you may sit down and go, okay, well, this is how I actually need to implement it, have some conversation with the story owner, right? And you could find out some things you didn't expect to find out.
Right.
And all those things can happen.
But you're expecting, just think go where Michelle's going, so you're expecting people to be writing code like on day one or early day two.
Correct. Correct.
So it is pretty front. Outside the sprint, you've done a lot of the pre-work to grease the wheels.
Right.
Okay.
But, you know, again, depending upon what you're doing and how things kind of break out, it's possible that, very possible that you might say, a 2-week sprint is just too short for
Right.
the work we're doing. We should do a 4-week sprint, right?
Well,
You're pretty much pre-defining that at the start of the sprint.
You
Well, you could
kind
have
of,
this project, you could have 4-week sprint in the first couple of sprints, and then lose 2-week sprint.
yeah, you could, if you start seeing your capacity go up on 4 weeks, you might say, yeah, we could deliver in 2 weeks and maybe that'd be better, or you could keep it the same.
Hey, Bob. Something related to this, I'm just talking. Do they ever say anything about how physically a team should work? Like more in a type of environment where, say, you know, you're sitting like this as opposed to everyone going to their own cube and working, or you guys ever?
Not at that. You'll see different discussions about organizing the team, right? The general rule is as co-located as possible is good.
Right.
To me, that does not mean around a given table, no. But,
Yeah, no, I
you know,
understand.
the teams like together on an aisle if possible. That sort of thing. Then there's the sprint review, and that's the implementation team, right? So we've done the demo, now they're going to go back and just look at what happened, right? And talk about things we could have done better, things we did better than the last time, so we should keep doing it that. Or maybe we made an adjustment because we thought it would make it better and it didn't make it worse. Just those kinds of discussions. And then after having laid all that out, you have a retrospective where you go, okay, now, given all that, what are the adjustments for the next sprint? What are we going to change? How we do, if anything. And then you're ready to start the next cycle. Questions? I know that you can't really read that, but one of the enablers for Scrum, and when we talk about Kanban, there'll be a comparable but somewhat different thing, is what's called the Scrum Task Force. And the idea is it gives a visualization of what is going on in the sprint. Okay? So in here are all the stories that are in the work queue for that sprint. And then along here, there's a column that says, this is work to do, this is work that's in process, this is work that's in testing, and this is the done column. This is a very simple, Scrum task force. So, and these different colored stickers kind of align with the story. So the story's here, you'll see that there's multiple, albeit colored, stickies, and the team and part of getting organized is like, what does each color sticky represent? Right? Blockages, problems, whatever. There's a whole list of things that you would look at and say, how do I represent that? So that when someone sees a color up there, they know exactly what that stands for, and then when they read it, they'll know the specifics.
So are there some guidelines to how you can do that, or are you just winging it?
There's guidelines and examples that you can pull that would say, you know, these are the sorts of things you should have color-coded for representing it on the board. And when you have the daily stand-up, it's generally around the task board. And to start, it should literally be a physical task board. There's tools like Jira, Easy Redmine, bunches of tools out there that have these kinds of task boards electronically. But the best way to start is to literally put it on a board and have the team gather around that board every morning, talk about what's on the board, talk about, okay, by person, this is what I did yesterday, this thing means this is the problem I'm having, you know, maybe decide to have a side discussion with, after the meeting with somebody who might have some ideas how to address it, but you don't have that discussion in the meeting. But you talk about what you accomplished, what you plan to accomplish the next day, what problems may need the intervention of somebody to get something that's a blockage removed so that you can continue to move forward. So again, stand-up meeting, you want to keep it around 15 minutes, set it for the same time every day. My whole team tends to get in, so, you know, 9-ish, 9:30-ish, but not late. And address these questions, right? Any questions about the daily stand-up? And of course, it will evolve with the team, right? But these are the essentials. What did you complete yesterday? What are you saying you're going to get done today? Are you having any roadblocks or impediments, person by person? And if it's a short roadblock or impediment, you can just address it right there. But if it's something a little more complicated, maybe two technical people need to go off after the meeting and talk about a possible solution. And you know, and some issues that may need to be addressed outside the team get assigned. You know, probably usually to the project manager of the team. Questions? Now, Anita mentioned last week that in the time she had done it, they eventually evolved to doing, in fact, it wasn't last week. In a discussion this week that I heard, they're doing a version of Kanban in her team right now. And they're doing their stand-ups twice a week. So groups can mature to seeing what's best. But you should start following the rules. And as you get better and better, you might say, okay, maybe we can do this every other day instead of every day. But the basic rule is every day, same time every day, all team members must be there. No, that's obviously they're absent. Backlog grooming, right? We talked about this in the model we had on the calendar. The Monday of the second week, There'd be a meeting about 4 hours is typical, where the backlog gets reviewed, the priorities or groupings, if you will, get moved and adjusted. Some things may go, you know what we learned in this sprint is we don't really need that. Right? Maybe in the prior demo, the customer said, hey, you know what? And a light bulb went on, and now when you move the backlog, you can take something and remove it. Okay? And if there's still any ethics that are now high priority, you want to start breaking them down into the stories and try in that session to do some assessment of the stories, story points, things like that. And this is the implementation team plus the product manager at a minimum. Could include functional managers and other interested parties, but basically the product manager and the implementation team are kind of the essential participants. Any question on backlog grooming? Now it's time to wrap up the sprint. It's the second Friday. The demo. So the team demonstrates working software to each other, the product manager, and other stakeholders. So that might be the functional managers, things like that, right? Or maybe the product manager's manager, depending on the scenario. And why do we do the demo?
Make sure we're all on the same page and everything's going.
And build confidence two ways, right? Build confidence with the customer that we're on track, that we're building what he needs, and with ourselves that we are on track in building what the customer needs. And back to the discussion we had a minute ago, Michelle, every story is supposed to represent a piece of working, demonstrable software. Now, you guys may remember back in the first or second session, we talked about one of the challenges, especially in Scrum, is, and especially if you're running 2-week cycles, is some stories may be really, really hard to break down into something that you can do in 2 weeks to show something, right? And so it is possible that there'll be, if you're going to stick with the 2-week cycle, and most of the time you can deliver it functionally, but some other ones you can get halfway, that you may have some that break up. If you end up having that as a regular problem, it's time to lengthen the sprint. And I kind of talked about that. You're doing this demo. You don't develop supplemental materials. You don't waste time on that. You take the feedback that you hear and you use it to create or update user stories that you have not yet run. Okay? So? And then the idea is, if it's a 2-week cycle, it shouldn't be any more than a couple of hours of demo and discussion with your sponsor, basically. Then we have the cycle review. Okay. Talked about this again a couple times. This is the team, right? The implementation team only. Talking amongst yourselves, right? This is where you're being open and communicating and saying, okay, what did we get done? What didn't we get done? So that we're going to have to, how much of that is left that we're going to need to roll into the next sprint? And that's put not done stories back into the backlog, right? Flag partially done stories as candidates to be completed in the next cycle. So that's sort of what we talked about a little while ago. But the cycle length is fixed. So if it's 2 weeks, it's 2 weeks. When you get to 2 weeks, you're done. You're not going to say, oh, I'm going to give it a couple more days because I can get further. It doesn't work that way. You just move the stuff if necessary to be finished.
So your adapters need to push putting your stories back, not necessarily to the backlog, or back partially to the cycle. When you review again for the next cycle, you may even push, when you do the backlog current edition, you may even push a partially done story when you get it on the queue as well, depending on what submission. Right? Correct.
You're going to review that, the backlog, where it is, what's the most logical stuff to go into that backlog, and you may say, well, I'll finish this later. There's you got to make a judgment, because when you're halfway through or 3/4 of the way through something, there's stuff in your brain that you don't want to lose.
Which is true, but what I'm saying is there are situations why the reason why you kind of do that is now a new thing has come up, your requirement has come up, so it changes.
Exactly.
Right?
I think that's kind of where I was going to start my question. So you've done your demo in the story that you thought you were creating, and come back and say, well, that's not what I really wanted, which is your typical demos. Well, that's not what I wanted. That is considered then a not done story that's going back in the backlog. Or the partially done story. It's one of those two, and then it's just how you prioritize that depending on what happens in your next cycle.
And depends upon how far off the mark you are, right? If you're way far off the mark, that may mean, yeah, that story has to be rewritten and start over. So there's all those scenarios are possible.
So you might go back to the slide and talk about the planning.
Only if I can operate the, back to download setting. And I didn't hit the switch.
Yeah, I believe you then. Still it's not clear.
So, Bob, just to wait, question on the stand-ups, where we give information and we are not shy to talk about what development we've made so we can address issues as they come along. Is there any section of the Scrum where we do like warm hands-off if the task includes multiple modules, from say HR to finance or finance to HR? Or
depending on the team, or it may just be function to function, right? So yes, but you're a small team, so those should be short discussions within the team. Within a sprint, you wouldn't be handing off a story from one sprint team to another sprint team. That wouldn't happen.
Okay.
But within that sprint, yeah, you may have handoffs to the change management team and say, okay, here we are. Now we can sort of see what it is, and maybe you still have work to do, but now they can start their work.
Okay, so in that case, the handoffs will be independent sprints. So HR will have one sprint, and we'll have one sprint, and then at some point we'll come together.
At some point there may be some stuff that, it just depends. Yeah.
Okay, good. Thank you.
Am I ready?
Yeah.
Please.
So what meeting is really looking at the priority in the backlog?
That's the backlog grooming meeting. So on that calendar, we have once a sprint.
So once every 10 days from this time.
Correct. So if it's 10-day, 2-week cycle, in that particular calendar, and it doesn't have to be that way, but in that example, you ran 1 week of a sprint. Following Monday, you set aside a few hours to groom the backlog, so you're ready when you start the next sprint to fill your work.
But in your demo, there was things that wasn't quite done that you really want to be a priority because, like you said, it's all in your head. So forgetting all that is rework.
That can go back.
You add that back into your next sprint.
Well, you may, as Vetri pointed out, you may or may not. But yes, that work logically goes back into the backlog, which you've already groomed. But just remember, it was in the sprint, so it already had some level of priority already. And you do consider it, along with all the stuff that you've groomed, as you decide what goes into the next
So
sprint.
incomplete work plus the backlog would be considered for the next sprint.
Correct.
That's what you're saying.
That's really happening in this planning meeting.
In this planning meeting, you would have looked at, yes, what didn't we get done? What did we do and oops, we got to do it again, differently, along with all the other stuff that you just groomed, and decide what's going to go into the work queue for the next sprint. Okay? Sure. And there's the retrospective, right? So you had the review, you decided what went well, what didn't go well, and then where were the bottlenecks, where were the blockages. It's all about incremental improvement for the next sprint. Metrics. Well, where would we be without metrics? Now, I apologize for the blurry chart, but this is the best, what I thought was the best example that I could find to demonstrate a burn-down chart. So a burn-down chart represents what's going on within a sprint. So you start, and in this case, it's 300 story points were in or queue for the sprint. And ideally, this straight line down to the end of the sprint is what you'd like to see in terms of eating story points, if you will, right? Of course, it doesn't work that way. And this other line shows what actually is happening. Where are we in the story point list? Here, well, it appears we're running behind. Up here, we're a little bit ahead. But the goal is to end up there. But as we were talking with Michelle a few minutes ago, sometimes we may end up, instead of there, here. And there's a gap. We didn't get it all done. Now what are we going to do? Then, remember we talked about release planning, right? So the vision, the general release plan, but then you have detailed release planning that says basically for these sprints are going to have about this much stuff in them, and there's, I'll make this up, 5 sprints in the release. Okay? So, in this scenario, there were 250 story points planned for the release. Okay? And the team, of course, starts here, and now these are multiple sprints along the line, not 12 or 13, that's just showing days. Okay? And the green says this is what we're achieving. We're doing some forecasting based on our variables, and so you have, kind of worst case, best case, right? And kind of the straight line of what we hope the forecast is to where we'll meet. What happened here?
And so,
Yeah. New requirements we talked about, right? A new requirement came in, so it went from 250 to 300, and then maybe at some demo somebody went, aha, now that I have this, seeing it now, this other couple things I said I needed, I really don't. And so some stories went away, and so it became a new goal for the release. So we have burn down and burn up charts, sort of the primary metrics used in Scrum. Any questions?
some of the questions you know on the metrics, just to tie together for me. So we finish a sprint, right? So I'm trying to kind of tie it to what we do today. So it sounds like the end report of the sprint, we have a pretty good idea of the functional design, at least the highest level. We kind of know what we want, right? So then you said we start doing development pretty early in the sprint. So when you're finished with this sprint on day 10, and you're showing this demo, is that kind of equivalent to when a developer today would then sit down with their counterpart and say, show them the code for the first time? Where would it equate to today? And what I'm trying to understand is when we're done with this sprint, we got to get into production. So how do we get there?
At the end of the sprint, ideally, if we've been successful, it's more like you've just come out of functional testing.
Okay.
And so
That's better. All right, good. So we would, at some point in that 10 days, hopefully early on for some of the story points, we would have evolved with the VAs. They'd be sitting down testing and looking at it. Right. So we feel like we have a functionally competent product. Probably not ready for production because it might need a series of sprints to get it all ready.
right.
Okay. I'm just trying to figure out how this fits.
And again, depending, on realities, you may have some stories that got to the point where it was a little slow, it was ready for functional, but that's one of the ones that's kind of hanging, still not done.
Right.
And gets into the discussion for finishing.
If we didn't finish the testing, it could be put into the next sprint just for the testing.
Correct.
Yeah.
Or for the change management work.
I'm not worried that this is just heavily development and not a team.
No,
So
it's
sounds like
a multi-function team.
Yes.
Other questions? Good. Second week in a row, giving you back 30 minutes. Good. Thank you all for your attention.
Thank you, Bob.
I'll post the materials hopefully today, and sometime early next week the webinar will get posted, or at least going to.